This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the science podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. What an episode we have coming today. Everybody is excited for astronauts to get back to the moon, and we get to talk about one specific area of that mission.
Yes, this is going to be so exciting. So what problem are we solving today?
How will we talk to astronauts on the moon?
Secondary messages online.
Will it be possible for us to talk to astronauts on the moon? Well, that's a great question, isn't it? Hopefully the answer is yes. So who is our guest today who's going to solve this problem for us?
We are going to get that information from the terrific Sirina Nabhan. She is systems engineer at the Deep Space Network at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Welcome to the show, Sirina.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and so to fill in everybody on the joke, Sirina gave us, Jeff and I, an amazing tour of NASA JPL, and it was so fantastic. We learned so many cool things, so we had to have her on the show.
I'm so happy you guys came to JPL at that time because Europa Clipper, the spacecraft that you saw when you were there, actually got shipped out, and it's no longer visible.
I
won't
know.
be back here until May. Yeah,
I know. That was
lucky.
Perfect timing. So now what we like to ask is, so you do all these cool things with space. You do work with the Deep Space Network, which we're going to talk about in a second. Were you a kid who always dreamed of working with space things or going to space?
So as a kid, I actually didn't even think engineers could be working on spacecraft. I thought astronauts did everything. I thought engineers were fixing trains and putting in electricity. It wasn't until late in high school that I watched the Cosmos, Carl Sagan's Cosmos.
Oh, yeah.
And that was just a classic. And I fell in love with all things space. And I was lucky enough to live near Pasadena, California. So I was able to go to one of my first open houses at JPL. And just made me think, okay, I have got to be in this space world.
That's fantastic.
I like that. So you caught on late in high school. What did you end up going to college to study?
So same thing. When I went to college, I just kind of wasn't sure what an engineer did, but I was like, okay, I need to study a STEM degree. I'd like to study math because I know I'll have a job when I graduate if I study STEM. So I kind of went into it, not thinking about it too deeply, but I had an amazing physics teacher. She really made me love electricity and magnetism. I actually failed the first time I took her class.
Oh,
I don't recommend it, but I'm very lucky to have such a inspiring and welcoming teacher. And she encouraged me to take it another year, and I aced it the second time around and really fell in love with the subject. From talking with her, I realized that I wanted to be an electrical engineer because she just asked me what I wanted to do with my life, what I wanted to graduated, and I fell right into it.
Electrical engineering is really cool, but we introduced you as a systems engineer. So maybe could you tell us the difference between that and how you got from one to the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. So systems engineering is a type of engineering, but it's not something you can study in college yet.
Oh,
that's because systems engineers come from all different kinds of backgrounds. They could be mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, aerospace engineers. It's pretty much an engineer that understands how multiple systems work together. I specifically work on software systems that are ingested into multiple sub-assemblies that make up one big system. So think kind of like a tree, and it has multiple branches, and each of those branches kind of touch a little bit of. And a systems engineer's job is to make sure that all of these smaller parts integrate into the bigger part, and we're able to efficiently and quickly get to our goal of building the overall system.
I love the tree analogy.
Yes,
that works, doesn't it,
about
Jeff?
to say,
Yeah.
what a great analogy. That really connects it for my brain, because you hear
Same.
systems engineer a lot, and I don't think anybody outside of engineers really knows what they're doing, but that really puts it together. It actually makes me feel like I have a smart question now. With your systems engineering and that tree analogy with the little pieces and the big pieces, which part of the process is more difficult? Is it the planning beforehand to try to figure out what all the little pieces you're going to need? Or is it afterwards putting them all together to make sure they work together?
That is a very smart question. And that was actually the birth of systems engineering. So you don't really
Oh,
find systems engineering before there used to be factories. So the invention of factories and kind of the overall machines getting larger made there a need for
okay.
systems engineering because people were wasting money, time, and effort building things separately. And then once they put them together, they realized it didn't work. So I
Oh,
would say the systems engineering, it's kind of this practice of, hey, let's do all of this legwork, let's prepare, and let's take our time and ensure that everyone knows what's going on before we go and throw ourselves into the project. And hey, sometimes there is replanning. Nothing is perfect, but at least we have
great.
to replan a
Right.
little bit less.
Yeah. Oh, that makes
Okay.
sense. Okay, so that kind of leads into, so the question is will it be possible for us to talk to astronauts on the moon one day? But you work with the Deep Space Network. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about the Deep Space Network first and then kind of go into talking to astronauts maybe?
Sure. So the Deep Space Network is a collection of antennas that are placed all around the world,
Mm-hmm.
strategically placed 120 degrees from each other, so that
Oh,
as the Earth rotates, we have constant coverage of over 45 different spacecrafts. These
wow.
antennas are the only thing that we can use when something goes beyond the moon. That's what we consider deep space.
Okay.
Okay.
And these antennas are pretty much, they kind of work like a cell phone tower, but they're big. They're about 70 meters, 340 feet, very high powered
Whoa.
Wow.
antennas, very high powered antennas that are literally listening to whispers from space. So think high power, low frequency.
Wow.
Okay. So using the Deep Space Network, there are 3 of them, and it's to have full-time coverage of any spacecraft be out beyond the moon. So that means every spacecraft that's ever gone out to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, beyond, they are all communicating through these 3
Exactly.
satellites?
Exactly. And that's a great segue because for the first time in almost 50 years, we'll be using the Deep Space Network to again communicate with astronauts. The last time that a man was on the moon was in 1972, and nobody has
Mm-hmm.
stepped on the moon since then.
Right.
And we are planning to send people back to the moon. And before landing them on the moon, we're going to put them into this really elongated orbit that's further than any place that anyone has ever gone before, kind of on
Right.
the dark
Okay.
side of the moon. And to do
Yes.
that, we need these high powered, low frequency antennas because up until now, we've only been communicating with astronauts on the International Space Station or the
Yes.
ISS.
Right.
And we
Okay.
use the near Earth network for that because they're pretty close to us. They're between Earth and the moon.
Right.
So I'm really excited to talk about the Artemis mission.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask you about that. So can you tell our listeners kind of about the Artemis mission and what's planned for that?
Yes, so Artemis was given its name because the Greek mythology goes that Artemis was the sister of Apollo. So
Yes.
just like when we went to the moon, we're going back, but this time we're going to go to stay. So NASA
Yes.
is planning this multi-part mission, Artemis 1 to, I believe, 7 right now, but it will span
Okay.
over 40 years of us getting people to the moon, getting the first woman to walk on the moon,
Yep.
and building moon bases and a
Mhm.
foundation for people to come back to the moon and have the moon be a waypoint for us to stop at before we get to Mars. All kinds of people are teaming up, international partners, commercial partners with NASA to be able to build cool machines like this rover I'm working on called Viper. Viper is this lunar
Ah.
rover that will have a titanium drill, a 5-foot drill that will go into
Oh,
the moon's
wow.
surface and extract water
Wow.
in the form of ice, and it's going to help astronauts make fuel while they're on the moon, so they don't have to pack their own fuel when they leave Earth.
Whoa, that's so
Very
cool.
cool.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time right now to be in the second space race, we're calling it.
Absolutely. Yes,
Very
it
good.
is.
So Jennifer and I were both lucky enough to be at Kennedy Space Center to watch Artemis 1 launch, but that was it was
Yes.
amazing.
It was amazing.
We were
Whoa.
both there. It really was an emotional thing. That was an uncrewed, so no astronauts aboard. Will the Deep Space Network be used to talk to Artemis 2, which is going to be the first crewed mission?
Yes. So first of all, I just have to ask you, how loud was?
It was loud, and it was one of those you feel it in your chest, loud.
That's
like
so cool.
Yes,
because we were as close as human beings could be to it. I was at the Saturn V, and Jeff was kind of at the PR people over at the press area, a little bit off to the right, and it was incredible. It was incredible.
It was incredibly loud. It was incredibly bright. It turns night into day. Jen is right with the vibrations, but the thing that sticks for me is I also remember sort of the pop noises of what it sounds like. If you listen to a rocket launch loud on your computer, you'll hear those pop, 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 pop. That was louder than I was expecting, and it caught me off guard.
It was wild.
I would have loved to be there for the Artemis 1 launch. I was in the dark room, if you guys remember the control center. We were in that one time. So the DSN actually, even though there wasn't any humans on board, Artemis 1 was supported with the Deep Space Network along with other networks. Cool. Again, because it was doing that really long elliptical, and they were not sure if the other antennas were strong enough to do so. So we supported Artemis 1. We plan to support all of the Artemis missions. And in fact, the DSN's getting kind of a huge upgrade to prepare for crewed missions.
Oh, wow.
Because once astronauts are in space, we want to make sure that there is no latency that we deal with. The DSN is built for these deep space missions like Voyager that's past our solar system right now that we send something to and it doesn't come back for 20 hours. And that's okay. But when you're dealing with astronauts, you want as least bit of latency as possible. Latency being the delay that we experience from sending a signal at the speed of light, but from millions of miles away.
Right.
So you'll be testing that with Artemis 2, because isn't Artemis 2 supposed to go the furthest humans have been away from the Earth? If I recall that? Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And there definitely will be humans on Artemis 2. The total amount of the mission is about 10 days. So they'll kind of be in this Orion capsule going around.
Which is not very big, by the way. Bigger than Apollo, but not very big.
Oh, really? Oh, man. I guess they're going to
As far as I'm concerned, maybe they think it's big. But
I know I couldn't do it. I give astronauts all of the
credit for that, yeah.
Yep.
So what type of, you just said the Deep Space Network is going to get an enhancement. What type of an enhancement? Can you sort of describe that? Is it more of software? Is there going to be another giant dish built somewhere on the Earth?
So both software and hardware upgrades are planned. Okay. And that's because, as I mentioned, the DSN specializes in dealing with faraway missions. And although this is the furthest that humans have been away, it's not necessarily how far a spacecraft's been away. So to prepare for that, we have to ensure that we have this specialized route that will prioritize communications with crewed missions before any other mission. So I'm sorry, James Webb. I'm sorry, Voyager, you're going to have to wait in line. We talk to our astronauts.
Well, I mean, that makes sense. It's kind of a capacity thing. I think those of us that have cell phones and, internet, you can kind of understand that when everybody's on, you can see that it takes longer to get responses and whatever.
The DSN has just grown so much. I mean, we support 45 missions, but it's estimated to double in the next 10 years. So that's not just NASA missions, but that's Japanese missions through JAXA, Korean missions and through CARI, ESA missions through Europe, all kinds of new space agencies popping up ISRO, the Indian Space Agency. So
Yep.
the incoming flux of missions is pretty overwhelming right now.
That's pretty incredible when you think about that and all the multinational countries that you're dealing with. But I actually want to ask you about Viper. When I did a NASA social at Johnson Space Center, we got to see Viper. When it was at its prototype stage and we got to talk to the engineers who were working on it, we basically peered in at the clean room. We didn't get near it. We got to see the prototype. We got to see the prototype outside, right? Which they were kind of building, and then the rest of it was in there. But can you explain what Viper is? And I'm wondering, will you be using the Deep Space Network to talk to it as well?
Yes, so Viper is actually one of my favorite missions, I gotta say. I've been working a lot on it these days. And to prepare Viper to use the DSN, we have to go through a series of testing to make sure that our antennas are compatible with the rover's antennas from millions of miles away.
Oh, okay.
So before launch, about 6 months before launch, we kind of have to prove that, hey, everything's in place. We're able, this spacecraft is subscribed to Viper. And to prepare for that, I've been going through testing, working with our RF, the radio frequency engineers, to ensure that all kind of checks out and looks good. So even though they're not launching until probably next year, we have a lot of work to do before then. And I say Viper is my favorite mission because one of the drill, the 5-inch titanium drill,
right,
is just so cool. I saw the drill part. I haven't seen the rover part yet, so now that's on my list. It was incredible to see. And the company that builds that drill actually also builds the rover drills on the arm of the Mars Curiosity rover and the Perseverance rover.
Oh, wow.
Which I just think is so cool. And they're right here next door to us, down the street from us. So incredible mission, very fun people to work with from NASA Ames and Johnson Space Center. But the idea of this mission, and I highly recommend viewers look up photos of it because it just looks so cool.
It does.
It'll sort of rove around and extract water from the moon. We've actually proved that we do have water on the moon in form of ice hidden in craters and underneath the crust of the moon. So the idea is just how Curiosity studies Mars. The rover is also going to ensure that the water there is usable for astronauts to be able to harvest pretty much when they're on the surface of the moon.
Which is pretty important because water's heavy to carry, right?
Exactly. And just think of all the
anybody who's carried 2 buckets of water knows what it's like.
Yeah, so that idea is, if we could sort of prepare to go to Mars by getting the moon ready to be sort of our checkpoint before heading out, our fueling point, kind of like a gas station, then it could really make going to Mars a lot cheaper than we had anticipated.
Oh, yeah.
So we've been talking about 2 different things, Deep Space Network, and then we just started talking about Viper. Going all the way back to the beginning, you're a systems engineer, so you can work on lots of different types of missions. I'm wondering, for somebody like you with your career, will you stay working with Viper all the way until it launches? And then after it launches, there's no more need for a systems engineer, and then you move on to a different mission? Or sort of how does that work?
Yeah, so I explained how part of my job is doing all of these tests to prepare the mission to go into space. But my other responsibility task is I kind of put on my detective hat on once a mission launches. Because a big part of my job is trying to look for lost data. So because we're sending signals from so far away, it's not really like how we send an email or how we stream online services like Netflix. It's not this constant flow of data back and forth. We sort of have to package everything up and then we send it. Or the spacecraft packages everything up and sends it over to us. And of course, there's problems sometimes because of the latency I was talking about earlier. So I will be staying with the Viper mission as well as all of my other missions. I work on about 10 to 12 right now.
Wow.
Being kind of their point of contact for, hey, where's my data?
Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
It actually makes me, not that you and NASA and JPL haven't thought this through already, but it makes a lot of sense for my brain to know that the person that helped to build it all doesn't just, okay, well, it blasted off. All right, time to move her on to something else. She's still around to make sure we get that data.
Definitely, yeah. It really helps to be familiar with the spacecrafts, which is something I love about the job, is I just get to learn about different spacecrafts and look them up online and know what they do, which I would do for free.
Yeah.
We won't tell your boss.
I mean, exactly. So, I mean, the part that you do, like you said, you look for lost signals. So I'm trying to understand, all of this comes in the deep stakes network as one thing, and then are the signals separated out so you can identify which ones came from where? How does that work?
So from a single mission, when we get a stream of data, that data is organized in such a way that it's coming in packages. And this is a really smart way of sending data that's coming from long distances that was invented years ago. I can't take credit for it. It's called the Space Link extension. And it's completely public on how to use it. There's these space protocols or standards called CCSDS, and they've sort of made a plan for anyone that's trying to use the Space Link extension, what we call SLE, to put kind of like an opening to that package, kind of like what we call a heading that has the identification of the spacecraft, timestamp of when it's being sent, and along with any other helpful information that would kind of identify where that data came from. So the data could be flowing back and forth from anywhere in the universe to JPL. And JPL has software that captures that data. And when it runs through its subassemblies, like the hardware has software ingested in it that separates things out. And it makes it possible for us to be communicating with multiple spacecraft using multiple antennas at any given time.
That's incredible. I think that's just humans. We are so pretty. We're so cool, right? It's cool that we can engineer all of these amazing things.
And it's really insane to me that, it's kind of like people had to work on it step by step. It's like someone had to figure out, like, let's use this kind of new technology or that kind of new technology. And this is what we have after, the 60 years that we've been in space now.
That's amazing.
Yes. Another thing I think is amazing in listening to you talk about how you're doing your systems engineering work. You've only talked about 2 different programs, but you just mentioned you're part of about 10 or 12 missions. Can you tell us just a couple of others that you are involved in working with? And then can you tell us, is it difficult for you to separate how each mission works so that you're not getting confused thinking mission 2, oh, wait, those are the parameters for mission 5?
So I do get confused. A lot of missions have the word lunar in them, which makes it really difficult.
Okay.
So I don't confuse anyone's data. Everyone's data is organized just fine on my computer. But I do sometimes, it gets hard to juggle so many missions because, again, for the first time ever, we've had, commercial companies and international companies use the DSN. So I know you could tell that I love James Webb. It's definitely something that's near and dear to my heart because it's such a unique mission.
It is.
Not only that the mirrors on it are beautiful and that it's unlocking secrets of the universe. And it's not even just because I had to support the launch during Christmas 2 years ago.
That's fantastic.
Wow. If you're going to miss Christmas for something, that takes the cake.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, it's, at first I was upset, but then we saw it actually launch and everyone was really happy. But James Webb is really near and dear to my heart because it also is a mission that caused the DSN to evolve, just like Artemis.
Okay.
We're putting down so much data. I mean, those pictures that you see coming out of James Webb with the amazing galaxies, those are terabytes of data. So we really, again, had to ensure that the latency experience from using a network like the DSN kind of had to be upgraded to withstand that massive amount of data coming down to us.
So
you're doing a great job because those pictures are beautiful.
It's not just me. Thank you. Definitely.
So you were just talking about James Webb, but you said before that when we have astronauts out on Artemis, either Artemis 2, Artemis 3, or whatever, that some of those other systems are going to have to wait. How do you plan to do that? I mean, is it going to be like all the data just kind of goes off to the side and sits over here? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so one of probably the most difficult jobs in the Deep Space Network, I think, is a scheduling job. And these are mission planners, engineers, but what they do is schedule time on the DSN for all of the different missions. So they
Okay.
understand, the orbital dynamics that has to happen for missions, and they take in the requirements that are needed. So to prepare for the Artemis, the multiple missions, years before they even start building the spacecrafts, once they're in the proposal stage of talking about what they want their mission to do, they have to say how long they need to be tracked for. So pretty much
Ah,
how much of the subscription to the DSN do they need? Because
right. Okay.
of course it all comes with a
Right.
cost. So the lucky thing is Artemis, it's going to need a lot of attention, but it will be over in 10 days. So we've sort of
Right.
cleared out the schedule. We've gone to the community and communicated with them that, hey, this is what we need. This is what we call a level 1 activity, which is a very critical activity. That
Ah,
means that it could be really dynamic and we kind of need all hands on deck and people paying attention to it.
right.
So it'll be a
Okay.
stressful 10 days, but at least it's 10 days.
Well, and just imagine the data and the information that we will get back from this. I mean, wow, we're going to learn so much from
So much.
Artemis.
Yes, and I'm really excited to kind of, again, like I called it the new space age, but we're really planting
Yeah.
a seed here for the next generation. Because for us to go to Mars, we have to make sure that people that are going to be investing in a career in space 10, 20, 30 years from now have something to go off of and don't give up on the idea of there being lunar bases and humans on Mars someday.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. So, in bringing this back to our question of will we be able to talk to astronauts on the moon, I actually want to jump one step farther. Obviously, NASA and JPL using all of the Deep Space Network and technology, you guys will stay in communication. Do you think that when we start building bases on the moon, even when we get the first base on the moon, might there be a possibility that like school kids would be able to talk to astronauts while they're on the moon the same way that they do on the International Space Station now?
Oh, certainly, certainly. And I think that'd be a great idea for NASA to do
Yeah.
because if you think about it, these astronauts, they have families, they have kids, they'll be wanting to
Right.
transmit their
Right.
videos and greetings to their children and families. So I think the way it's going to work is, of course, there's no way for us to have any real-time communication. There'll always be a delay when we're communicating from that
Yes.
far away.
Right.
However, it'll be cool to kind of send these like video messages. I mean, I think sci-fi shows do a great job of
Yes.
how that would kind of look like. But I certainly think that
Right.
astronauts love to talk to students and explain what they're doing and show them all the cool stuff that's around, just like how we have in the International Space Station today.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
going to be great.
and talking about students kind of leads me to the challenge. But before I get there, I want to ask you, like, what would you say to kids these days who maybe want to do what you do or want to get into space?
I would say the thing that got me to space is sheer persistence. I'm not,
Love
I'm
it.
not an astronaut. I'm not, I wasn't a prodigy or anything. I just, like I mentioned, I failed some classes along the way. But I think when you want something bad enough and you keep trying at it, then really nobody could stop you. And as cliche as this sounds, if you don't give up on your dreams, they'll eventually happen. And the other piece of advice that I think really helped me when I was in college and even younger is to take any opportunity that presents itself. Because sometimes,
Yes.
even as adults, we kind of get
Yes.
fixated on this is my goal, this is what I want to do. And then we kind of overlook opportunities that may be sitting right there. But those opportunities might lead you to something even better, some interest that you never knew you had. So just take any and all opportunities that present itself to you.
Oh, yeah. I love that. And I mean,
Wonderful.
that's kind of how I ended up here too. I never dreamed that I would
Cool.
be writing science books for kids, and the opportunity presented itself.
And there's
And-
such amazing books too. I love
Right.
that.
Well, thank you.
I
Thank you.
agree. Before Jen gets to that challenge, I do want to say I love in your story that where you ended up and what you're doing right now, you failed this class first.
Mhm.
I failed
love that part of
electrical
your story.
engineering. I know what you're. I know. Yeah.
You get it.
I love
I got a
that part of your
D.
story.
So.
Yeah.
It
Yeah, no, it's again,
is
yeah,
inspiring. I mean,
thank you. Yeah, I was lucky enough to have that teacher, and then I think, even though some people, even my mom, who's been kind of the biggest supporter of my life, was like, oh, are you sure you want to do electrical? Maybe try biology. No, I want to make robots in space. And hey, I'm not making robots in space, but I'm doing something even cooler that I never thought that I would like.
Oh, that's fantastic. My gosh. Well, this has been so fun, but we are at the point in our show where we ask our guest to give our listeners a challenge. I'm very curious what your challenge is going to be, Sirina.
So I mentioned talking about the Artemis missions. The Artemis missions are going to span over 40 years. So I want the listeners tuning in to think about what's space exploration going to look like in 20 years from now.
Ooh.
I'm an engineer for the Deep Space Network, but maybe one day I'll be working on the moon, building even more powerful deep space network that's going to be helping astronauts get to Mars and getting them their Netflix shows on there. It's needed. So I think my challenge to listeners would be think of careers, and not just any careers, but unconventional careers that may pop up from people being on the moon. Think of people being tourists, for example, on the moon. Maybe people that are going to be mining asteroids that have really good minerals for us to use. So 50 years from now, what's an unconventional career that doesn't exist today that probably will years from now?
Oh, I like that one. I think
I do.
And I think it gives kids of all ages an idea that, even JPL today here and all of NASA is not just made up of scientists and engineers and astronauts. There's hundreds of different types of careers and different people that are all needed to help us get to space. Even though the astronauts are the ones that go and everyone, they're amazing, and they are. But
exactly,
they couldn't get there without tens of thousands of people behind them.
Yes, literally artists who are sketching out kind of what it would look like on the lunar surface once we have equipment there. Even Viper at one point was just a concept and it wasn't yet a rover. And someone had to sketch it out to sort of engage the public in caring about this sort of thing. And that's really important.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this has been a fabulous episode. Yes. Thank you so much for being on Solve for Kids, Sirina.
Thank you, Sirina.
Thank you, guys. Talk to you later.
Fascinating conversation. Of course, the answer will be yes, that we can talk to those astronauts. That is a mandatory. But learning about how we're going to do it and how Artemis missions are going to be different than the Apollo missions were, so we can keep constant communication, was really cool to learn about. And what about this challenge? What is space exploration gonna look like in 20 years? How many of us think 20 years into the future? But we all love space exploration. Let's all take a few minutes and think about it, and then we hope you share it with us. What did you think, Jen?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think there's a lot of people who are even working this who have no idea what space exploration is going to look like in 20 years. And then I love kind of how she added an extra little challenge in there, but about, okay, if we are on the moon, hopefully in 20 years, what are some of the kind of unconventional careers you would need? I mean, everyone thinks astronaut, of course, engineer, but maybe you're going to need nuclear engineers because maybe we're going to have nuclear power up there.
Right.
I mean, maybe you're going to need people who are gardening, right? Who can grow the food. I think this is a great thing for all of us, kids of all ages, to think about. So if you have any thoughts about either one of those things, Jeff and I would love to hear from you. You can tag us on our social media. We are at KidsSolve at Facebook, X, and Instagram. And don't forget to check out our website, solveitforkids.com, where we have links to every one of our episodes and also ideas for books if kids want to learn more about this or any of the other science careers we talk about.
And I think I know somebody who has some cool space books that may be related to this topic. Psst, Jennifer Swanson. But we definitely want you to keep learning all about this, because this is coming and we want to be part of this future. Until next time, you'll hear Jen and Jeff on
Solve It for Kids.